And we're back. Welcome, Phil.
We're
Welcome,
back. Thank
AJ.
you.
It is good to have you with us tonight, AJ, and I'm excited to talk about
Welcome, AJ.
James
Me
Bond.
too. Thank you.
Your book, I had the name right in front of me, the Cinematic Connery.
The Cinematic Connery. It's a
Yes.
nice cover.
That
There
is
you
a
go.
nice cover.
It's a beautiful cover. Yeah, it's a beautiful cover. I didn't do it. My skills don't extend that.
So this book, your book, it came out this week or last week?
Last week. The week 13th of October, Thursday 13th.
Nice.
Okay, yeah. So it's brand spanking new. Yeah. So I know that we only have you here for an hour, so we'll go ahead and dive in to discussing your book, right?
Absolutely. I'm intrigued.
First, I think before we dive into your book, just tell the people a little bit about yourself. You know, you're an author. You do podcasts. Tell everyone a little bit about what you do.
Well, we have only got an hour, so I'll be brief on this one because it could take a while. So yeah, I've been writing and podcasting now for many years. Writing since I was a kid, really, but podcasting and writing on film for about the last 10 years, near enough the last 10 years. And I released my first book in 2017. No, I started writing it in 2017. I released it in 2020. It took 3 years.
There you go. Yep.
And that was all about mythologies in TV and film and that kind of thing, which was a slightly different book to what I've done now. Then I did a cultural history of Star Trek in 2021 called Star Trek History and Us. And then, it was a lot of fun to do. I wrote that during the pandemic, during the first lockdown of the pandemic. So,
nice. Yeah.
COVID was good to me in that one. I probably shouldn't have, but it was. But I've always loved Sean Connery, so it was originally going to be a podcast because I have a podcast network called We Made This, where we do lots of pop culture shows. But do a lot of do a Connery podcast, and I was going to go through each of the films one by one, and then I recorded like one of them, never aired it, and I was like, actually, and I was actually like, this is a book, like there's enough in here for a book, and then the rest is history, really.
Yeah.
That's cool. I love that. The development. It's awesome.
So what sparked your interest in wanting to write about Sean Connery specifically?
Well, he's always been my favorite actor, since I was a kid. And I grew up in the late 80s, early 90s, my first memories of movies and things like this. And by then, he was making stuff like The Rock. In the late 90s, he was making things like Entrapment and all of these, movies at that period that were.
He voiced the dragon.
He did.
Draco.
Draco the dragon. Yes.
I love it. It's one of my favorite childhood movies. I love that movie.
It's a brilliant film. He did it. Dragonheart. He did that. I think he recorded it in I think he might have been at home. I know he definitely recorded something in the bathroom of his villa. Could have been voiced over work for could have been that. But yeah, and then he sent it off. I remember there was a clip of him in my research where he's talking about how amazed he is by satellites. And he's saying, I recorded this. I recorded this dialogue, and then I sent it over the satellite to Milan, and they did some amazing. And I'm like, bless him. He's like in his 60s, and he's amazed by satellite technology.
It's lovely.
But yeah, so it was that, and then I discovered Bond later, really, because I grew up with Roger Moore and Brosnan as Bond. So it was only later on that I really watched his Bond movie. So I came to him back to front, I suppose.
Okay.
Nice.
Okay.
So back to front.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I think my introduction, with Bond, since we're on that topic, I remember in the States there was a TV network called TNT, and I think in the summer, once every summer, they would do 14 days of 007. And they would play every single 007
Amazing.
film from Sean Connery's first one to Never Say Never Again, to the whatever the most recent one was, which at that time was probably like just GoldenEye, maybe, yeah, probably GoldenEye, maybe Tomorrow Never Dies. And I remember really falling in love at first with Sean Connery's James Bond. That was weirdly my first Bond. I watched those films. I liked him. I liked the kind of the the retro aspect of everything, given that it was from the 60s and quirky and fun. And then I guess sort of worked my way through the Bonds in sort of a linear fashion from start to finish because of that. But Bond became Connery became my favorite, but I don't really like Roger Moore. A lot of people do, obviously.
They do.
He's definitely not one of my favorites. But then again, I really like Timothy Dalton. I have some love for Pierce Brosnan and so on and so forth. But yeah, Connery was definitely my first introduction to Bond and kind of began my early childhood love of that character. I don't know. What about you, Phil?
For me, James Bond was a thing that was always around. So I don't have any memory of when I first discovered the legend that is James Bond. But I'm also a kid of the 90s, more likely, because I was born in '89. So so for me, the only Bond that I knew of was Pierce Brosnan. And I remember my parents saying, no, you can't watch those kinds of movies yet, because I was in the single digits when I was a kid during the 90s. And so for me, it was always some kind of elusive, sort of like more adult-oriented thing I would never understand. Until I did watch, I cannot tell you what the first James Bond movie was, but it was one of Pierce Brosnan's ones. And I think it was the silliest of them. Not including Die Another Day, because I was a little bit old enough to
Die
understand.
Another Day is by far the silliest.
I know.
Maybe The World's Not Enough, but that's like 1999. I think.
Well, it's the one where I think me and you, Luke, like last year, we watched all of Pierce Brosnan's Bonds.
Except
together.
for Guy No Time
Except
to
for
Die,
that, yeah. Except for Guy Another Die,
and
I told you, and I told you that the one that I remember the most that haven't seen. I think I've watched it on a plane. That's what I did. I watched it on an airline. It was an airline feature, and it was the one where she was like, "Die, Mr. Bond," and she gets shot. And that's the only thing I remember of that movie. And I think that was The World Is Not Enough. So that was the one.
Maybe.
Yeah. And I've just been a casual sort of James Bond enjoyer as time went on. I think there we go.
Fair enough. So AJ,
I don't know much.
In terms of writing your book and wanting to write about Sean Connery, what were there any kind of interesting factoids that you were discovering along the way about his Bond career? I think.
Sorry, can you say that again?
Yeah. I was saying, in terms of writing your book on Sean Connery, were there any interesting factoids that you had that you discovered rather about Sean Connery's time? Working as on the Bond films.
I mean, there's various things over the films. I think there was a couple of fun ones. I think, well, I say fun, really struck me to the point where I understood why he didn't want to do it anymore. Was the point that he was filming You Only Live Twice, and he's in a bathroom in somewhere like Japan or wherever where he's filming it. You get mobbed by fans who are basically trying to get him in the bathroom. And that was the point. He just went, "I'm not doing it anymore." he was really, really annoyed by it. As you would be.
Yeah.
As you would be.
And that was the point that you would. And that's the point really with the Mania stuff, which was very, very similar to Beatlemania in many ways. Maybe not quite as powerful, but it was big in the 60s. That was the point where it got too much for him. And it was just that crazy mob mentality that they thought he was James Bond. They didn't really see the distinction between him and Sean Connery. I think I also like the story of, I think I've mentioned this before, but the story of the Bond film that his brother made. Are you familiar with this story?
No, I'm not.
No, what?
Okay, exactly. Right, Phil, that's the correct response to this. Okay, what? Because, so in 1967, Sean Connery's brother, Neil, who was a plasterer in Scotland, worked in Scotland all his life, not a film star, is approached by an Italian film producer to star in a Bond movie. So in it, they were Euro spy movies, and it was basically Bond-esque knockoffs that they used to trade on all of the Bond popularity at the time, and they'd make these terrible low-budget spy movies, basically. And it was a bit like the spaghetti western, but the spaghetti westerns were better usually. You know, they had people like Sergio Leone making them. This didn't. Yeah. So it was called. They called it Operation Kid Brother, just to make the. And then it gets better. That on set, Neil obviously there was a language barrier in this kind of thing. He wasn't an actor, and they just used to keep saying to him, "Okay, Connery," in what he was saying, "Okay, Connery," and it stuck as a title. So in abroad, the film is known as "Okay, Connery," and they even got that's the response, Phil. They even got in a lyricist. I think her name was Christy, to sing a theme tune. With believe it or not, accompanied by Ennio Morricone, one of the great composers of history. Seriously, right? And she's basically warbling, "Okay, Connery."
Oh my gosh!
Over and over again. So
you're just making this up right now.
No. This isn't a fever dream that I'm telling you about. This is real. So you can find this movie on YouTube. Seriously.
Oh
so,
yes.
Yeah,
all right.
Look it up, Operation Kid Brother, and it's Neil Connery playing Dr. Neil Connery, but he's actually James Bond. For real, he's actually James Bond, and in many ways, and he goes on a mission, and it's got the same Bond girl who was in From Russia with Love, Daniela Bianchi. She's the Bond girl in it. It's got the same villain from Thunderball, Adolfo Celli, who is the villain. It's got the guy who played M, Bernard Lee. It's got Lois Maxwell, who played Miss Moneypenny. And they all got paid more in that film than they ever got paid for the actual Bond movies.
Wow.
Oh my God.
So Neil Connery got $5,000, which at the time was a big payday.
Yes.
And Sean wasn't the happiest about it.
Right.
Sure.
He basically turned around and went, "Why are you all doing this? Why are you all making this knockoff movie?" That kind of thing. But yeah, so it didn't sadly launch Neil into a superstardom career. I wish it had, but he did make one or two other things. But yeah, he never played King Richard at the end of Robin Hood or anything like that. You know, Neil Connery.
Oh yeah,
sadly.
no.
See, there you go. That's one of the fun things that's in the book. But there's plenty of other stories.
Gosh.
That is hilarious.
That is one of my favorites.
If I were Sean, I would be annoyed by that. I'd be annoyed by not only my brother, but all of my co-stars going and making a knockoff film. But at the same time, they are getting paid more. It's tricky. But
can't blame them.
Mm-hmm.
Not really, no. So obviously you're doing all this. You're diving into these factoids and stuff. We know why he left the character after You Only Live Twice. What inspired him to come back for Diamonds Are Forever?
Let me just get some banknotes and just go like Jordan Belfort, right? Like this.
Yeah.
It was dollar bills. So basically, he was approached. They asked him to do what became On Her Majesty's Secret Service, which is obviously now famous for George Lazenby coming in, doing that one movie that has got that real cultural traction over the years, and then has the really tragic ending with his wife's death, all that kind of stuff.
Yes.
And he's asked to do that, and he says no. He's done. He goes off and does other things. We're left with the great lost Bond movie that never was for me, because I think at the start of Diamonds Are Forever, they attempt to do some sort of Bond on a revenge mission thing, and it doesn't really make sense because he wasn't in the previous movie, and had he been, it would have been incredible. However, he keeps saying no. But what he wants to do is he wants to make his own couple of movies, one of which is a film called The Offence by Sidney Lumet, which is eventually made in 1973. It's this really bleak story where he plays a detective who goes through into this abyss of darkness, basically. Nothing like Bond. But he says, but no one will finance it. So he goes to United Artists, and the guy running the United Artists, David Picker, he keeps asking him to come back. And he says, yeah, I'll do it. Give me a massive paycheck. Let me make 2 movies that of my choosing, and I will come back. And so he does, basically. And he's terrible in that film. Like he looks really old, for one thing. He looks about 60.
Yeah.
And sadly, he only gets to make one of those 2 films. He only makes The Offence. The other one never gets made. So, he was a bit ripped off. But and Diamonds Are Forever is awful as well. It's not like it's a good film he comes back and makes.
It is not. No, it is bad. It's I have literally I have memories of back when I was a kid watching 14 Days of 007. That was the film that when I watched it, it's like when you watch something, there's certain films that like make you feel icky. I don't know what it is, but when they're in like Las Vegas and stuff, I feel icky. The whole
it's a sleazy movie. It's really sleazy.
Wow.
Yeah, and even to this day, like I can see it in my mind. I'm just like, nah.
Like, I haven't made it that far.
Oh, well, you're not missing anything, Phil. Although there is one line that always makes me laugh, in that you've got Lana Wood, who's playing one of the Bond girls, and she's, let's just say, she's been gifted in certain areas, and her name is Plenty O'Toole. Her name is actually Plenty O'Toole, right?
Okay.
And she goes up to Bond, and she says, I'm Plenty O'Toole. And his response is this: oh, named after your father, perhaps. It's just like, that line. That line is worth it alone, yes. I think. Everything else is terrible.
That line, well, the song. Diamonds Are Forever.
Actually, the song.
Diamonds Are Forever.
We'll get into it in a little bit, but Roger Moore is by far my least favorite Bond, but he does have some really good songs. I have to admit.
Yeah.
So are you a fan then of? Because some people are firmly a Bond film fan, but are you a Bond book fan?
Well, I'd love to say I've read every single Bond book. I haven't actually read all of them. Mm-hmm. I am a fan of the ones I've read. And I've probably read about half the canon at this stage.
Yeah.
I am more a fan of the movies because I think the books are very different. The movies have a sensibility that isn't just based on the books. I said this in another recording I did. If they made the Bond movies completely in the style of Ian Fleming, then they would never have been as successful. The secret sauce was what Cubby Broccoli and Harry Saltzman and their gregarious blockbuster American approach bring to Bond, the movies. And they don't adapt them straight on completely. I mean, the book of Dr. No is quite different from the movie of Dr. No, for instance. And, had Ian Fleming had complete control over who played Bond, Connery wouldn't have gotten near it, for one thing. And Connery is the reason they take off at the beginning. So I fell in love with the movies. The books are, in parts, well written, pulpy, stylish. Fleming's brilliant at describing things like the meal he's eating, the character that Bond's eating. Bond's always eating in those films where he's drinking, and he describes it like in just food porn detail. It's really good. Yeah. But they are awfully racist, and that's putting it kindly.
Particularly kindly.
Yeah, particularly Live and Let Die. Which again, the film is nothing like the book. So they are a mixed bag.
Yes, yeah, I would say so. I think it would be interesting. I think to go to within the multiverse and see what closer adaptations how they would have played. I do think after 60 years or so now of Bond, it would be interesting to see a more closely adapted version. Casino Royale is probably the closest of all of the Bond films to be closer to the tone, I think, and the spirit of Fleming's books. but I do think it would be interesting. I think obviously Bond, when it came to adapting from the pages to the screen, it was as you're saying, the broccolis, the flash, the gimmicks, the gadgetry, all that sort of
Yeah.
stuff that really, I think, made Bond a film icon. I mean, he was already a literary hit, literary in the broad term. I'm sure literary snobs out there are going to be like, "He's not a literary character. How dare you?" But yeah, it's I do find it interesting, because the thing that I find fascinating is the Bond of the books is really very different to the Bond of the movies. You know, he is at times definitely way more sexist. But he's also the other thing that's interesting to me about James Bond on the page is I don't read James Bond on the page and get, heroic vibes. I'm like, this guy, he's an anti-hero, in my opinion. He's a damaged dude. He's an alcoholic. He sees himself as nothing more than just a blunt instrument for the British government, who really doesn't care about anything except the British government and keeping the Queen and country safe. So I think the Craig films adapted that well enough, but he's still not as cold. This last week I reread Casino Royale, and I was quite surprised to kind of be reminded how cold he is regarding Vesper, especially when she's kidnapped, and he's sort of like, I don't give a shit. If she dies in this chase, that's her own problem. She shouldn't be out here anyway. And I was like, wow, man, you are really a cold individual. And it's quite fascinating to me. I think to see that be changed so drastically for the films. And I think it probably did the films a service to tone down that particular aspect of him. But I do think there is a way to adapt that sort of cold Bond without maybe some of that kind of
sharpness,
maybe, that I think could be interesting. But one thing that's fun about the Sean Connery films is I think is some of the things that they establish that become iconic throughout film history. Not just the barrel moments and the songs like that, but even if you go to From Russia with Love, that beginning scene with the fake Bond, with the Bond wearing a mask. And what spy franchise is hugely famous for their masks that follow James Bond?
Mission Impossible. That's a good point.
Mission Impossible from the TV show did masks, and all the way through they're famous for that. So it is interesting to see that sort of these small influences that you kind of pick up in these other places. Phil, have you read any of the books?
I've not read any of the books. I only know one thing about the books, and that is that because when Quantum of Solace was coming out, the movie, there was talk about it being like the last title that was written by Ian Fleming, I'm thinking.
Yes, I think so, yes.
And it was a short story, and it was...
No, that's Quantum of Solace.
Solace, that's what I said.
Oh, sorry, I thought you said Casino. My bad.
No. And I just remembered what the story was about compared to what the movie was about. And I was like, ooh, the story is interesting because it's about a Quantum of Solace within James Bond. And I thought that was quite engaging, and I didn't like the movie very much, unfortunately. I don't...
Well, no, that's a whole other kettle of
fish.
That's
a whole other thing.
It ages well, that film. It ages well,
Does it?
I think, that film. Yeah.
Okay.
I do.
Haven't seen it in years.
It's got the license to kill effect. It's worth going back to.
Okay.
Yeah. It's saying more than you might think. What I like about the title, though, because at the time nobody knew what Quantum of Solace meant. Just while we're on this,
right?
They had to explain it in a lot of interviews. And at the time, there was a brilliant spoof song by Adam Buxton, and it was called Something of Boris. Nothing to do with Boris Johnson, but they changed the lyrics. It was the Something of Boris, and it's just YouTube it. It's very funny.
Something of Boris.
Nice.
Something of Boris.
So here's a question for you guys then. So do you think, looking at, since we're still sort of talking about literary Bond, do you think literary Bond of the books, is this version meant to be, do you think he's meant to be a role model in the way that, you know, other adventure heroes are, you know, kind of role models that are...
Well, I don't think the intention was that. Like I said, did not read the books, don't know much about him, but from what I know, he's a very cold-hearted character, and I think the exploits he's on is probably something that's more, look at what crazy things this, like, look at this spy story, you know. It's that I think that might be it. I'm talking out of my butt. I have not read any of the books, so no, I wouldn't think it's intentional to be like a hero character like he is in the movies, because in the movies I do believe that they amped up the charm, and that's what, like what you guys were discussing, that's what became memorable about him, and that's what contributed to his longevity in pop culture, I'd say. Maybe, I don't know.
What do you think, AJ?
Oh, you're right. I absolutely think you're right. To be fair, the books I think are Ian Fleming's colonial fantasies playing out on screen, playing out on the page, because he was in the war and he worked for British intelligence, and I think people have tried to play this up a lot more than it was. He was never James Bond. I mean, there was even a TV show a few years ago called Fleming. I think it was like Dominic Cooper playing him, very James Bondy. So that's ridiculous. It was never James Bond.
Right.
But he may have known people like James Bond, and he set out to write a character at the point where, you know, he started writing Bond when he'd retired, essentially. He was only fairly young. I mean, he died fairly young. He died on the year they made Goldfinger, so he never really got to see the film's a big success. But he was living out his fantasies through Bond. You know, he chose an intentionally dull name. He picked an ornithologist, a guy who was an ornithologist who used to write books, called James Bond, and he used that name and wanted a really boring name for a character who was living in a glamorous world. But he was never meant to be a hero. He was a reflection of an establishment that Fleming very much believed should be protected, an empire, essentially. And you know, he was an assassin. You know, he's an assassin. And this is the interesting thing about the films, and this is what I think the Craig films have flirted with without fully going down this road, is that he is, in many ways, he is an anti-hero, really. You know, the films, as time went on, and as we got through Connery towards the end, and they became much more, you know, full of grandeur and spectacle, and especially then when you get into the Roger Moore era, he is, you know, he's parachuting off cliffs with a Union Jack parachute, you know, all that kind of thing. By that point, he is the British superhero. He has become the British superhero, and that's kind of what happens with Connery as well.
Yes,
but if you look back at Dr. No, he's not that character. He is much more like more. He is funnier. You know, although the books are funny, the books do have wit in them, but there is more of an attempt to make him likable. But he is an assassin, and you know, you see him being an assassin. There's one scene in Dr. No where he just shoots a man cold-blooded in the back, and he says, you know, this is Smith & Wesson, and you've had your 6. Just shoots him, and it's cold-blooded. And it's only as people start to embrace the character in the movies and the box office receipts start to go up, and people in the 60s really feel the need to have those superhero characters. You know, this is the same time that Marvel is kicking off. This is the same time that those comics are coming out, where you're getting all of these superheroes and you're getting these adventures and this escapism. And that's what the 60s was about. It was that reaction to the austerity of the war years, and then rationing and all of these things over, you know, and at the point that Fleming was writing the books, you know, he was in Jamaica writing them, but he was bored. He wrote in to Bond something called acid, which is essentially like a nihilistic sense of boredom. life. Really, he and Tyler Durden would have got on great from Fight Club, I think, because he had a real sense of just this nihilistic viewpoint about life. And that's not a charming, swaggering hero. So I think he definitely was never meant to be a role model, but he kind of became one over the years. When the film got and that's to the Craig films, because they do try and pull back a little bit more to that stuff. But quite successfully, I think.
Yeah, I think so. I think it brings up an interesting point, because there's this whole discussion about that Barbara Broccoli recently was in the media saying how Bond is going to evolve as men are evolving. It's a sort of ludicrous statement, because I don't really know what she means by that, because like humanity is always in a state of flux, I suppose. But what does that, what did she actually specifically mean by that is an interesting question, I think, because, and a weird thing to kind of impose on Bond, because in some ways it's kind of, I find it mildly ridiculous, because Bond has always been in a sort of state of evolution anyway. When you like I said, from the books to Connery, there is a significant difference in that character. But then when you go from Bond to Bond, there is this constant shift in his DNA, I think. We can discuss the Roger Moore era on that, because I think Roger Moore is this next stage of the Bond evolution that for me doesn't really work, but for a lot of people it does. But it retains some of the campiness of the Connery era, but it adds a lot of almost slapstick humor. Thinking of the scene particularly in Moonraker, when Jaws is falling from the plane, and they play the circus music as he falls onto a circus tent. This ba 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 da da ba ba da, and I'm just like, oh, that's
compared to what we were talking about. The contrast is quite apt.
The other one is in Octopussy, where there's a snake charmer at one point playing the James Bond theme, and it's you're a bit like, what has happened?
Yes. I mean, what do you make of that? Because it is quite, in my opinion, it feels like it's not a stark difference, but the tonal shift from Connery to Moore is quite fascinating. What do you think is the reason behind that shift?
Well, I think personally, it was, and this is where I think the evolution question is interesting, in that I don't think Bond evolves really as a character from the 60s through to arguably the Daniel Craig years, but with a little bit of them where there's some elements towards that, I would say. But the films very much do. And the films very much embrace this idea of colourful escapism, and they get more and more colourful and exuberant and funny. I intend trying to be funny. I think because I think a lot of it is based on the actor who plays these roles. Bonds are always a reflection of the kind of actor that plays them. Connery was funny and he had the wit, but you couldn't have done the Roger Moore gags in the same way with him and make it work, really.
No.
And Daniel Craig's exactly the same, which is why I really like Spectre, but Spectre is basically trying to be a Roger Moore Bond film. Often.
It is.
And Daniel Craig is a Sean Connery Bond, So there's a scene in Spectre where at the very beginning he's in Mexico City, and that building basically collapses around him, and he lands on a sofa, and he gets up and he just adjusts his shirt. That's a Roger Moore joke, basically.
It is.
It's a wonder there wasn't a peasant with a bottle of whiskey next to him on the sofa drinking, going like that.
Yeah. I can see that.
Wonder. But I think that thing that you've got films trying to do different based on the actor who plays them, and I think that's part of why by the time you got into the latter Moore films, because the early Moore films do have shades of Connery, you know, from the Golden
They
Gun,
do.
he's quite brutal at points. He slaps a woman around the face. Even For Your Eyes Only later on, has him be quite dark. He kicks a guy to his death off a cliff. All these things.
Yeah.
But by the time you get into the 80s, and Roger Moore, the man, is as firmly established as Bond, there's not much difference. Roger Moore's still doing hello, that kind of thing. It kind of morphs itself around that kind of persona, and I think that's why the films evolve, as well as the fact that I think audiences, as you go into particularly the 80s, it is blockbuster, it is colour, it is exuberance, and the Bond movies are trying to keep up with things like Indiana Jones. They're trying to keep up with other franchises like Star Wars. That's why Moonraker goes to space. Yeah, the trends, exactly. So I think there's a lot to it in terms of the Bond films reacting to other things as opposed to really charting their own course, to be honest.
Yeah. That makes sense to me. I think, but then I suppose then the question is what happens, you know, what brings us to Timothy Dalton? Because in my opinion, he is really one of the best Bonds. I
like him a lot. Yeah. I've only seen Sorry, I'm sorry. Go on.
Go on.
I mean, I liked it's not License to Kill, it's the other one.
The Living Daylights.
The Living Daylights. There we go. Thank you very much.
There you go.
That's the one. That's the one I watched. I really enjoyed that one. I do tend to go back to that quite often.
I actually love both of his films. As you were saying earlier, Jay, that License to Kill ages well. It's you can go back to it and it's pretty decent. Even in relation to, as you were saying, to Quantum of Solace, the last time I tried to rewatch Quantum of Solace, it was much easier to watch than those early watches, you know, when it first came out. But Timothy Dalton, I thought is a very interesting Bond. I think we have these two guys. We have, you know, On Her Majesty's Secret Service. Why is his name just flown out of my head?
George Lazenby.
George Lazenby.
You have George Lazenby, and then you have Timothy Dalton, who are, you know, they're Bond for just a hot minute, but I think the stamp that they leave on the character is quite long lasting, which I find interesting. And so I guess what my question would be, what was Bond, what was happening in the pop culture sphere to have this, you know, strip away, because they really strip back the silliness for Timothy Dalton, and he really is sort of the proto Daniel Craig Bond. You know, there are some gags in it. There's gags when he's walking around with Q, and there's, you know, references to the other films, you know, scattered throughout, you know, which is a fun thing. But something that I think Timothy Dalton does, and I think does maybe, in my opinion, better than Craig, is I think he balances this sort of tortured individual a little bit better. Daniel Craig is great, but he is so stern. He's so mean-faced most of the time. He's very, like, you just don't want to mess with him. Whereas Timothy Dalton has a there's something about him where you're like, he's smiling, but there are times where you feel like it's a front, and then that kind of veneer goes down, and you see a bit more of a tortured individual. I do feel like he's quite subtle with some of his stuff, and I still don't know if he gets enough credit today. But what's your takes on Timothy Dalton as Bond?
I think Dalton was ahead of his time, really, in that, and I don't think they quite realised that at the time, because Dalton in the frame-ish as far back as '69, the point where Lazenby got the role. He was too young. He was a young Shakespearean actor, really, at that point.
Yeah.
But they're all through those 2 decades. Timothy Dalton was very much on the back burner. Roger Moore was the heir apparent, definitely, but Timothy Dalton was in the conversation. So, but originally in '86, when they were casting this and they were filming it, it was supposed to be Pierce Brosnan, and it would have been Brosnan for The Living Daylights. However, he was committed to Rain Steel, which was a TV show he was making at the time in the '80s, and he couldn't get out of that. In which he played quite a smart Bondish character. So it was only, by the fates that actually they went to Dalton at that point, who was, by that point around the right age, around the 40-ish mark, and and he wanted to do it. So there's a whole different story where Brosnan actually does those films. And to be fair, Dalton would have done more than 2. The only thing that prevented that was the fact that after License to Kill, there was a long lawsuit with United Artists that stopped Bond production for the whole of the first half of the 1990s. Yes. And there was there's a great book by Mark Edlitz called The Lost Adventures of James Bond, where he gets a lot of information about all of the scripts, all of the planned movies that would have been Dalton's 3rd film. And it would have involved going to China. In fact, there's a lot of Tomorrow Never Dies in what would have been Dalton's 3rd Bond movie. He goes to China. There's a lot of it's quite early 90s in the fact there's lots of technology that absolutely wouldn't exist in the real world, in that, like robots and all this kind of thing. But it's fascinating. It really is fascinating. He would have gone to Hong Kong. It would have been a Far East adventure. So Dalton wanted to do it, and he was in the frame for a long time. So I think there might be a perception that Dalton just wasn't in it for very long because he wasn't that well received, and I don't know if that's true. I think they really loved Dalton in the role, and I think they wanted to do more with him. But by the time that they got through the contracts and things and everything, he decided he didn't want to do it anymore. I think too long had passed, and he thought, I'm done with this now. And that's when Brosnan was free and the stars aligned, and nobody would not want Brosnan in the role because he was fantastic. But I think Dalton, I mean, The Living Daylights is actually it has those shades of Moore, in it. It really does. If you look at The Living Daylights, there's a lot of comedy in there. There are some gags that don't fit Dalton in a way that he has to try and gamely, push through. But License to Kill is an example of the kind of movie that he was best suited for, where I think you could have gone down the road with Dalton of getting into this kind of psychology that you did with Craig, and they glanced at with Brosnan because he was a good enough actor and he could have sold it. And that film is the most personal in many ways up to that point that Bond, apart from Majesties, that Bond feels about anything. But the problem with that film was it was a real hodgepodge of all kinds of things. There was a little bit of Death Wish in there. There was a little bit of Die Hard in there. There was it was very American, and it was maybe even too American in a way, without wanting to be rude to any Americans. But it lost a little bit of the British glamour that I think Bond always needs. So really Dalton, I think if had Dalton got his 3rd movie, I think people would be remembering his tenure differently, and he might even have had a 4th in the end. So fate really got in the way with him.
It sounds like I don't think, looking at how the Bond films progressed, I do feel that I'm glad that he wasn't in GoldenEye. I'm very mixed on GoldenEye. I personally think the film is not very good.
Yeah, we both watched it recently, like last year.
Yes, now that isn't
we
to
both
say,
discovered. Yeah, go on. Tell the story.
This
Tell
is
the
not
story.
to say, bunch of asterisks here. I love Judi Dench. I love Pierce Brosnan. I love Samantha Bond. Is Moneypenny?
Ironically named.
I know, right? She also narrates the Queen mystery series books by my friend Sophia Bennett.
Cool.
So The Winds or Not. Go find that. She does a great job on that. Anyway, I love the look. I love the style of GoldenEye. Sean Bean is great. That intro to the film, I think is wonderful. But the problem is after that intro, the film just loses itself to nonsense. The plot itself just it doesn't hold up for me over time. So controversial statement. I think I actually prefer Tomorrow Never Dies to GoldenEye. I think that's a much more interesting, complex, better Bond movie than GoldenEye. I feel GoldenEye gets the attention because it's the first big movie after a very long time, but also the video game. Everyone loved the video game, right? But I don't know. Am I crazy? Am I crazy in thinking this?
Well, that's really funny because me and you watched it together, Luke, right? And that's where we both kind of discovered, wait a second, I remember this movie being the best. And yeah, so
very disorganized.
Yeah.
Are we crazy, AJ? Are we crazy?
Yes, because this is the point I tell you. GoldenEye is my favorite Bond movie. Genuinely.
Oh.
Yeah, no, it makes.
sorry
I'm
about
not surprised. No, don't be sorry. There's,
we're just confused because we didn't like it as much as we used to. That's the thing.
All right, resell us on GoldenEye. Tell us what it is that you loved about it, because I don't hate it. I'm not saying it's a bad movie. I'm just, it doesn't land for me like it used to. But yeah.
Do you know what? Right. So some of this I freely is nostalgia. It was my first Bond movie in the cinema in 1995. Okay. It will always have a special place in my heart in that way.
Makes sense.
Although, if you remember, there is a scene in that film where he's in sauna with Famke Janssen, and it is quite racy for a Bond movie.
Yes, it is. Right.
And I went to see GoldenEye with my mum. So you can imagine how I felt at that scene.
That is not a film to see with your parents.
It's not. It's really not. But it's. I think the thing with GoldenEye, I've always felt, is that it is in some ways the perfect Bond movie in the sense of that it has everything in there theoretically that you need in a Bond movie. The only thing it doesn't have is the score. The score is terrible, and it's
dude.
The score is terrible. There's one sequence that wasn't scored by the same guy, and it's the Moscow tank chase. And it is by far the best scored bit of the film because it wasn't scored by him. And if the film had been scored like that sequence, it would have been great. And the score matters. You know, the Bond movies, a large part of their success is the music, without a shadow of a doubt. And the music's terrible. But I think in terms of everything else with GoldenEye, it has the quintessential Bond in Brosnan, who does all of the Bond things. He's in the tuxedo, he's driving the Aston Martin. But the thing is, what it has, I think, for me, it's also got the fact that it's set partly in Russia. For the first time, Bond goes to Russia. Bond had never gone to Russia before, and it was very much it was a sign of the change in era, post-Cold War era. The credits are literally the Lenin. Not with a just to make the point, but it has a lot it's doing in that way, and I think it's got a story that is geopolitical and it's personal in a way that Bond never pulled off quite as well as this. The story with Alec, and and everything. It comes together really well, and I think it's just got everything in there that makes a good Bond movie. I appreciate that is partly subjective. And you know what? In terms of Tomorrow Never Dies, I revisited Tomorrow Never Dies recently. I went to the Tomorrow Never Dies when they released them over the summer. And do you know what? Fun. I had the best time. The best time. It was so much more fun than I'd seen in years, that film. Yeah. It's so good.
Yeah. It is.
And so I get it. I can see where you're coming from. But GoldenEye will always be my Bond movie.
That makes sense. For the longest time, my favorite Bond movie was The World's Not Enough, and I think that for me is a nostalgia moment, similar because I didn't see it in cinema. The very first Bond film I saw in cinema was Casino Royale.
Great
probably because of maybe my age. I don't know if there were any Bond films that. Oh, I guess I could have seen Die Another Day, but that just looked terrible, and I wasn't gonna go do it. So I could have seen that one, but the others, I was just a bit too I guess just a hair too young. But I remember purchasing the VHS of
The VHS.
the world's not enough, and there was something about that film that I really loved, really connected with it for some reason. And going back to it now, it is quite cheesy, but it does have a lot of fun stuff in it, I think, as well. But where I am now in life, Tomorrow Never Dies, I think is the best of Brosnan's. I think it's the one that ages the best over time. Maybe because it leans in so well to current day issues of corrupted news agencies and things like that. And I mean, I've always loved the line when oh god, what's the bad guy's name?
Elliot Carver.
Elliot Carver,
Wow.
that's it. Elliot Carver. When he is talking to his screen of people, and there's the tech guy on there, and the gag is that the microchips that are being used for the technology are going to be obsolete in 6 months, so everyone has to buy the new updated version. And I'm like, that is effing Apple all over. Like, even those little moments that we don't see any more of, I'm like, that is what we are in today. We're in this world of crazy news nonsense and technology that is purposely built to become obsolete when it doesn't need to be. And yeah, there was something about that I just loved. But also,
I know both of us kind of like felt that too. We were watching it together.
I loved Michelle Yeoh's character. I thought they made, like, Bond gets a lot of flack for its films being, you know, the ladies being underused or being there just for sex objects and stuff like that. I kind of disagree with that premise. I don't fully buy into that. I think, yes, there are moments where there is indulgence in sex and things like that. I think looking at the Connery era, you have to think about what was going on socially at that time. That was a very sex is on the table all the time. It's free, it's open, it's fine, doesn't matter. There were, you know, relationship boundaries were you know, becoming non-existent, and it was vogue to do that, right? You know, and I do think once you get to the, you know, the Dalton era and the Brosnan era, yes, there is casual sex, but there's also genuine affection for people as well, and for characters. You know, it's typical in every movie franchise that the love interest seems to always be swapped out for a new love interest anyway. So that's, you know, that's kind of besides the point. But the fact is, I feel that in these movies, you know, in GoldenEye, Bond does seem to have genuine affection for the Russian lady. Can't remember her name. There is a connection, I think, between Bond and Michelle Yeoh's character. And I do think, you know, when it comes to The World's Not Enough, I mean, the whole movie was made so that Bond could just say, I always wanted to have Christmas in Turkey.
Oh, yeah.
That's the only reason that movie was made, but
basically
they made a pretty good film around that line.
True.
But I do think Bond sometimes gets a bit of maybe unfair flack for some of its for some of that stuff. I think there is something a little bit more nuanced going on, and stuff that is socially relevant to the decade in which those films are being made.
Yeah, I agree.
That I think is reflected in those movies, that I think current audiences sometimes choose to neglect. Am I wrong?
I don't think so.
I think it depends a little bit on when the films are made. I think if you go back to the 60s, there isn't a vast amount of female agency in those films. You know, particularly there's one sequence in Goldfinger where Connery literally slaps Margaret Nolan's ass and says, "Man talk, off you go." You know,
yes,
it's not all that bad, but I think there is I think as time goes on, these things
Yes.
do improve to an extent, and I think the Bond women, the Bond girls, and then as they grow, they are more women. I think you get into the modern era.
Yes.
There is a little. There is a little bit more agency to them. They sometimes, in fact, quite often, they have missions of revenge they're on. The Spy Who Loved Me is a bit like that. For Your Eyes Only is a bit like that. You know,
Yes.
the writing doesn't always back it up. You know, the writing isn't always up to speed with it.
No.
But you know, you've got, like, with License to Kill, Pam Bouvier, played by Kerry Lowell. She's a really good kick-ass agent. Basically,
Yes.
she's a CIA agent, and she's pretty strong. And then when you get into the Brosnan era, like you said, Wei Lin, she almost had a spin-off film, you know, and she's excellent.
Oh, that would have been great.
She's completely.
Up for that.
You would have been, and she's completely his match, you know.
Yes.
And so, you know, you do have these kind of female characters, but it's hit and miss. I think realistically, and you know, even in the Craig era, it's a little bit hit and miss. I mean, Vesper is a terrific character and one of the best Bond girls. And indeed, so is Camille, played by Olga Kurilenko in Cosmos Solace. She's excellent. She doesn't even sleep with him. You know, she is purely there on a mission. But then you look at Lea Seydoux' character, Madeline, and it kind of falls down a little bit there, you know, for the last two films. So, so it is a little bit hit and miss. But I think the intention is to try, as the films go on, to make it more of an equal playing field. And I think that is where... You mentioned earlier the question about evolution and what Barbara Broccoli was talking about. I think what she's trying to say, and this gets to this same point, is that, and you saw a little bit of this in No Time to Die recently, you can't really have Bond be the sexist, misogynist dinosaur, as M calls him in GoldenEye.
Yes, yep.
Forever.
No.
And especially not now, you know. And I think if they understand that if people still want to embrace Bond as a character that ultimately you go to the cinema to watch because you like him, for all he's an assassin and that he's dangerous, people still want to believe in him as a hero. They still want to believe in him as a British hero. But I think they appreciate that in the modern day, a wide span of an audience isn't going to go for a guy who is too sexist, dabbling too much in regressive attitudes, and that to be charmed a woman is not the same as it was now as it was in 1983, you know. And I think that's part of the evolution they're talking about. And I think it's a good idea. I think they've got to they don't get too far away from Fleming, but at the same time, I think he's up against a lot of competition now. You know, there are a lot of superheroes. Yeah. There are a lot of franchises. Yeah. There are a lot of people that the kids will be the ones who take Bond forward, because old duffers like me and older are going to be gone. Like they need to believe in him, and that means that he's going to have to be a little bit different than he always was. Yeah. So
true.
I think that's well said.
I do get that. Do you? My thinking on this is that as we've kind of said, you know, through Brosnan's era and Craig's era, and as far back as Dalton's era, it seems, I do feel like there is a sort of a gloss over audiences' eyes that see Bond through Sean Connery's lens that I think is slightly unfair to force that lens onto Brosnan, onto Dalton, onto Craig, because I do think they approach relationships in a very different way. I think the Brosnan does get a bit racy from time to time. But Dalton and Craig really don't. They push the envelope from time to time, but there is a bit more acceptability in terms of the relationships that they're having. I think occasionally, not always. There is the awkward moment in Skyfall when he does go into the shower with that one girl that I think that should not have happened given her past. I just think that was a moment that they didn't think it through.
No.
At all. I don't think they meant anything by it, but I think they just didn't think it through entirely. So I do, but I also agree with the fact that, you know, it is interesting to play with these characters and evolve them, because I think the point of what we're trying to get at really is from the pages of Ian Fleming in which Bond is saying women need to be staying at home and not in the mission field. You know, from that to Connery to Lazenby to Moore to Dalton, you know, there are subtle adjustments to his character, to what he thinks is acceptable, I think. And I know you have to go here, so we'll just sort of round it off with this kind of last thought. There were a lot of people that were frustrated because Broccoli was talking about making Bond sensitive. And, you know, people were like, oh, I don't want some fucking sensitive Bond. Blah, 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 blah. And I kind of sat there and I looked at that. And I think what is a real shame in current pop culture is sort of lack of understanding of what some of this stuff means. Because Bond being sensitive doesn't make him not tough. You know, yeah. I think of Jason Bourne. I think of Mission Impossible, Ethan Hunt. They're both tough spy characters. You know, Bond doesn't care what happens to him, but his sensitivity is in the books rather is what happens to his country. As the films go on, he cares what happens to M. He cares what happens to Moneypenny. He cares what happens to various ladies who are the Bond girl of the film. He does demonstrate sensitivity and caringness, and I think that seems to be kind of lost in people's reaction to this word sensitive, right? That I think, you know, I do also think that, you know, Broccoli would have done well to just not have said anything, because Bond has already demonstrated sensitivity. So do we need to emphasize more?
It's a difficult one, because I think there's a lot of talk now as to what direction do they go in now. Yes. I mean, it's a difficult one for them, because they've gone back to the Fleming well, but they've also modernized Bond in a way that you can't really go back from now. You can't really go back to Brosnan and Moore, you know, because as much as you could get in theory Henry Cavill in there and him do what he does in The Man from U.N.C.L.E., where he's a very good Moore style Bondy character. Yes. That ship has sailed, really. And they've said that they are gonna stick to the style of Daniel Craig in many respects, but they can't completely repeat the trick at the same time. No. And I think what they've now got to do, I think, is think about. They want Bond to be an event. They want it to be every 3-4 years, and they want people to really want it, and they want it to be exciting, which I think is great. But and there's lots of possibilities, lots of areas they can go in which Bond can reflect the things that are happening in this modern day and age. Absolutely. I mean, Danny Boyle was going to make No Time to Die, and he wanted Russia to be heavily involved in that film.
Yes, I loved his idea.
Sorry, you cut off there. What were you saying?
Yeah, no, I just said I loved Danny Boyle's idea, and then everything paused. But no, carry on.
yeah, absolutely. And he, you know, we don't know all the details about that, but he did. He wanted to send him to Russia, and he wanted to do all these things. And I think with the balancing act now is that because you're totally right. You don't have to be strong without being sensitive. You can absolutely be both at the same time. And Bond has demonstrated this in the past. But I think what the debate, you know, it's mixed up with a lot of debates that are going on right now about what being a man means, you know. And I think there's a lot of and you're right that maybe they shouldn't have gone down this road yet, because it's a big thorny question, in that there are people out there, and there are maybe some Bond fans who do want the sexist, misogynist dinosaur back. But those people have always been there. Those people were there in 2005 when Daniel Craig was coming in.
Yeah, totally.
Totally. They're not the masses, and it's not to say that these people should be completely ignored, but it's more about the fact of, if you want Bond to be around in 60 more years, you cannot keep having him be the same person making the same films. And this is something that I think a lot of people don't quite get. And that this is the reason it survived and it actually prospered in the last 15 years is precisely because of the changes they made. You know, if they tried to make another Die Another Day, we wouldn't be having this conversation probably right now.
No.
It would have gone. It would have gone. It would have been over. So I think there's a lot to debate about it, and it is perhaps fittingly put, it is an evolving conversation, and it will go on for a few more years until we see what the next Bond's like.
Yes, I agree.
An evolving conversation. That's good.
It is. And the very last question we're going to ask you, and then I know you need to go, sorry, is what do you think is most important to Bond? Is it Bond or is it 007?
That's a really interesting question, because there's different ways you can interpret the question, I think.
Yes.
I think the most important factor is who Bond is, because 007 is wrapped around, you know, we saw a female 007 in No Time to Die. You know, there are other ways to tell these stories, and I think what matters is who he is, what he represents, what he's saying about Britain and who we are, and what do we want him to be? Who do we want him to be? You know, we still want him to be charming, we still want him to be sexy, we still want him to be the best guy, the best one out there to save the day from lunatic villains, which he's done ever since these films started. We still want that, but do we want him to be somebody who reflects attitudes that are old-fashioned, or do we want him to be a kind of sexy, swaggering, confident hero who is a modern man with all the different facets? And I think I know what the answer is, and I think you guys probably do as well. We probably all agree.
Yes, no, I'm definitely of the belief that I do want to see. I want to see James Bond. I think 007 is great, but I'm interested in the character and the way James Bond as a character continues to develop on screen. I think we've tried it. We've seen Bourne without Bourne, and it's terrible. We've seen it. It doesn't work. Don't do it. But yeah, I know you need to go. AJ, thank you so much for hanging out with us.
Thanks so much. It's been
James
really
Bond.
awesome.
No, thank you guys. It's been really great.
Yeah, everyone check out AJ's book, The Cinematic Connery, a great biography of all of Connery's work. Lots of interesting stuff. Go to Amazon or wherever you would like to pick up a copy and get one. But yeah, hopefully we will see you again, AJ. Have a good night.
Yeah. Thanks, guys. It's been a pleasure.
No worries.
Take care. And remember,
see you later.
Nobody does it better.
No one does it better.
Hey.
Bye.
See ya. Bye.
See ya. Oh, that was good fun. Biffer has a comment in the chat that I'm just going to come to real quickly. Most important to Bond is not to die, but they unfortunately killed him off in No Time to Die. I agree with you, Biffer. I think you know, if we want to get into a brief No Time to Die discussion before we wrap things up, I think No Time to Die was the most un-Bond film ever. I think it was such a nonsense storyline. I know they carried themes over from Spectre, where Bond runs away with Madeline, but I hated the idea that Bond ran away with Madeline in the first place. I think Spectre missed a trick by not having Bond be a mentor figure. I don't know why he needed to get with a girl like half his age. That just seemed, that to me is kind of when Broccoli is saying Bond needs to evolve.
Yeah, that's kind of like a remnant of the previous kind of things that we were talking about. Give me 1 second, I'll be right back.
Yeah, that's fine. So I think that's exactly what she was getting at when she was meaning Bond needs to evolve as men have evolved. You know, that's a very complex thing to say and a very complex thing to try and break down. But I do think that is something that is probably what she's really meaning. Because No Time to Die was an absolute.
Yeah, No Time to Die was a movie that you could really feel was continuously changed, I think. Sorry about that noise, if there was a noise. Right.
Oh, you could. I mean, the fact that they brought in Phoebe Waller-Bridge to come in last minute and quote unquote punch up the script.
Yeah, whatever that meant.
It meant that anytime there is a fucking gag in that movie, it's from her. And they're terrible. Like, Fleabag and Bond are not the same thing. Don't put Fleabag style interactions and humor in Bond. That doesn't work. I suppose, yeah. So that really annoyed me. You have the fanboy moment where the CIA agents are kind of fanboying over Bond, and again, it's just like, this is hokey, this is cheesy, this is maybe more Roger Moore era kind of goofiness.
It's so weird, yeah. Like,
yeah, it didn't make sense. And I think the travesty was killing Bond. I think
yes, it doesn't feel like you ever should do that. It's a unique thing with James Bond. I guess it's a unique thing with many other characters. Like, have we ever had Batman die in a comic?
Well, I mean, every comic book character has died and come back.
I know, but they always come back. Yeah, but James
they're
Bond,
kind of mythic.
Yeah, okay, but James Bond is different. I think. Like, I think we've discussed with AJ about like all the different iterations and how James Bond it became Britain's hero. It's fascinating. It's absolutely fascinating.
Absolutely. I mean, Bond is the British institution. Bond is, he is what America, the American response to Captain America, to Spider-Man, to, you don't sit there and think of, who's the great British superhero. Who do you think of? Bond is that primary?
You don't think of Captain Britain.
Well, that's a Marvel character created by Americans.
Exactly.
Like in terms of something British made that is the
Avengers,
iconic, heroic thing. I mean,
the Avengers.
I know the Avengers. I know the Avengers. Yes, I know the Avengers.
Okay. I wanted to be clever. That's all.
No, it was good, but there's nothing as big as Bond. Bond is Britain's Superman. I think it's kind of what AJ's point was. I think that's a very good point.
It's absolutely true.
But in the same way, I mean, if you carry that analogy further, Superman has also evolved over time. He's not just truth, justice, and the American way. He's become more global. He is a global hero. He is truth and justice and helping
all
everyone.
That in between. That's what he said. No, I don't know what he said. All that in between. I don't remember what it was.
And everything in between. And I think that's actually kind of an important change for the character, because it's not about, for that particular, it's not about country lines for him. Bond will always be about Britain, right? But I do think there is something to seeing that character, quote unquote, evolve. I do think the reaction to Broccoli saying that he's going to evolve as Min evolved is one of those moments where she's probably just speaking off the cuff.
It has to be, like,
and it's not that she's wrong. I think she is correct in what she's saying, but I think it was received so negatively by people on the internet who read that to mean he's going to evolve and he's going to be, he's not going to be strong. He's going to be, crying and all that kind of stuff. And it's like, well, as we were saying, Bond has demonstrated lots of times moments of sensitivity. A lot of our, male heroes do that quite a lot. You do come across that, and you do see that. I mean, what, thinking of bringing it back to Star Trek, Captain Kirk goes above and beyond to rescue his friend Spock in the search for Spock. He jeopardizes his career to save his friend. That is sensitivity. That is him doing something out of the love and affection that he has for his friend.
Absolutely.
And I think people kind of misunderstand or have sort of wanted to diminish what sensitivity means for a character,
Yeah, no, I think that it's also just people who don't understand where the subtlety comes in with telling stories as well. It's because many people who watch. This is what I've been noticing about just the public as a whole, and like just
Mm.
people as a whole, and it's just people want easy answers, and there's a lot of people that if they're not into the craft of storytelling or understanding or being fans of storytelling, they just want to go to a movie and see something. They're
Yes.
not here for. So when they get information, and I've had this experience as well, like when I told people about stories for movies that I want to make or something like that, and it's just like it's always give me just the basic, simple, easy thing to understand.
Yes.
And so in this case, when it's like James Bond, we need James Bond to evolve, it off the cuff statement, proliferated by a lot of different online
Yeah.
things to generate a little bit of a buzz, and
Yeah.
then many people who don't want to even like look into the like just to ponder in depth about what that kind of means or can mean. It's just
No.
becomes blanket statement. Give me the easy answer is, oh, they're gonna make it, you know,
Well, the
effeminate
easy,
and whatever.
yeah, the easy answer is, make it simple. Tell me what to think, so I don't have to think. And I think there's a really important moment in thinking about what toughness and sensitivity means. There's a really important moment in the first Bourne movie, Bourne Identity, towards the end, where Bourne is at he's at a house in the countryside, um, on his own. One of the Treadstone agents are trying to kill him. They have a battle in the field, and these two agents eventually have a conversation. And Bourne looks at the guy, and he's like, look at what they make us give. And this is a moment where Bourne, the victor of the fight, is standing over his nemesis. He doesn't sit
Yeah.
there and beat the shit out of him. He doesn't blow his head off. He just looks at him and says, "Look at what they make us give. This is This is what we are doing. This violence is awful. This is not acceptable. But what is going on?" And I think that's a really interesting moment.
I love those
Um,
moments.
and again, I think you see it in every single Mission Impossible film. Ethan Hunt is always sensitive to the well-being of his team. In that moment in Fallout, when he thinks Luther is going to die, he does everything in his power to make sure that doesn't happen. You know, um, and so I think there's things where I understand the kind of initial knee-jerk reaction to, you hear these terms and you suddenly say Bond sensitive. That's nonsense. But if you think about it critically, if you look at the stories that have been developed, and that we've seen on screen, Bond is actually quite sensitive. And truthfully, a lot of good heroes are sensitive. And so maybe it's time to kind of rethink things. What I would like to see in future Bond stuff, and film and storytelling in general, is I would like to see things less dumbed down. I think too many movies and shows and books are dumbing down themes that I think really, should be there to make people think. Which again is why I
Oh,
am,
dude. Yeah.
a massive fan of classic Star Trek. I think
I'm having so much fun watching TNG.
well, yeah, I mean TOS through Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, and Voyager, and all that. They don't just give you an obvious bad problem. They give you two sides of a problem, and then you are there trying to decide which version, which side of the line do I fall on. And not every line is simple. I think Deep Space Nine did that very well, where you have Bajorans who are at times working alongside Cardassians who had basically enslaved them. Kira Nerys is constantly having to battle an internal battle of I have to work alongside this individual who was awful to my entire race of people, who occupied my entire planet, who forced us to there's a lot of obviously World War II parallels between what was in Deep Space Nine, and it's a very complex situation, and I think we don't see that level of depth and complicated relationships in a lot of our modern stuff. In some areas we do, I think in terms of superhero-y sort of things, I think The Boys does it quite fantastically. I think the way they approach tough subjects is very well done, and the kind of the conflict that the boys have, within themselves, as a team, but also individually.
I didn't know they were a team. I thought it was just like it's just called The Boys. It's just like all the characters in this show.
No, the boys are the team. The boys are the team. They're not all boys, but the boys are the team. Because
gotta call the boys.
Yeah.
Have you seen Peter Jackson's first movie, Bad Taste?
No.
Oh, that's at the beginning of the movie where like this, like I think MI6 it's just a hand and there's a big control button. It's like, something's gone down. We gotta call the boys. And then he just presses the button, and it says, "There's the Queen, the boys, the boys."
Oh, lol. Biffer has also added something. Biffer says they spend too much money for these movies to fail. If they cap the movie at $50 million, they can take more risk. I mean, I don't disagree with you, Biffer. I mean, what, I can't remember what movie it was that was made very cheaply but was really good recently.
Dredd was one. No, wait, Dredd was not one. Sorry,
No.
Don't listen to me. That was the worst example. Blair Witch Project.
No, God, no. I can't remember. There was a movie recently that was made for. I wish I could remember what it was.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I agree. I think not everything has to be such grand, epic spectacle.
I never understood that. Even my dad would tell me, like, but Philip, they think that if you invest more, you're gonna gain more, and to some degree, it happens. But I don't understand why it happens, and I don't understand why you can't give us a middle ground where we can have Deadpool.
Yes,
there we go.
Joker and Deadpool. Deadpool might be what I'm thinking of, Biffer, actually. Yeah, that was one that was not a lot of money, but it looked great, had a great script, was wonderful. I will sing Deadpool praises all day long. Joker, was okay. I'm not a big fan, but but the point is still valid. The
point is valid. That thing made $1 billion.
Yeah,
it was made for what, 50.
That's what Biffer's saying. I'm not going to check the facts. I'm just going to assume that you're telling us the truth, Biffer. But I do remember that Deadpool was made for. It wasn't a lot of money that
60
that went into Deadpool. But yeah, I think that's a
or 90. 90.
Yeah, it's a smart idea.
I don't understand. They don't do it that much. They all put all their chips in one bag. It's always the big tent pole. We need to do the big tent pole.
Yeah, and I'm bored with that. I'm very bored with that.
I'm so bored because you can tell everyone's just afraid to lose money, and that's why it's always the same.
It's very true. So,
hey,
there we
Mr.
go.
Bond.
Mr. Bond.
The
evolution of James Bond.
Okay, so you want to see my... Sorry, go on.
I was going to say, what will we get next? It's hard to say, but I do hope, I'm fine to see the character be, remolded, reshaped a little bit, but I think the biggest thing is the biggest, most important thing is staying true to, I think, to the general essence of who the character is, but finding ways to adapt him into a current to whatever the modern state is. I think BBC's Sherlock is probably the best example, the first 2 seasons, of what it means to take an old character, adapt it for a modern time. Mm-hmm. And Bond has always done relatively well since the 80s to adapt to more modern sensibilities. I have no doubt that the new Bond will adapt to modern sensibilities, and people will still like it. I don't think they're going to give us a Bond that is going to be a radically 180 different.
No, it's the Broccoli's are still. Barbara is still there, and many of the same people are there, and they seem to know what they're doing.
Yeah, I think so.
The track record suggests that that's the thing, even if we don't like a certain amount of Bond movies that they produce, but still it keeps going. There's always something that pulls you in.
Yeah, I mean, I am more than fine for the kind of obnoxious innuendo to be toned down or taken out of the Bond movies. It's quite eye rolly. I think like that's fine. Get that out of there.
Get that out of there.
There's other things you can do. But yeah, what have you been drawing?
So everybody talks about the fan casting of Idris Elba as James Bond, and I was like, you know what? Let's just do that. Let's just do that. Let's just see what it looks like. And I just made a poster of. Let me see if I can actually share it. I think it's better for me to share it than you. And yeah, so I was just like, you know what? That's gonna be my art project this time. So I made a poster. I was like, you know what? I haven't done like a movie poster before, like for a while. So I thought maybe now is a good time to stretch those movie poster muscles and see if I can do something interesting. And then I asked Luke off the air before we started, like, who would be a good, even though you don't like Idris Elba being James Bond, and I am not.
Yeah. Share the picture.
I'm trying to. It's loading. It's loading. I don't have a supercomputer yet. Okay, my iPad has to connect to the freaking.
You're building this up for like 30 minutes. Be like, okay, so
I know.
I was gonna draw pictures. So okay, so I got my pen, and then I put my pen to the paper.
Yeah.
Like, share it when it's ready. In the meantime, like and subscribe to the channel, guys. That helps.
Yeah, like and subscribe. We talk about fun things, like today.
Yes. And this Saturday, we're going to be back this Saturday, same time, 7:30. We're going to be discussing the Universal monsters, so Dracula, Frankenstein,
I'm very happy
Bride of
about
Frankenstein, the Mummy, Wolfman, all that kind of stuff. We are going to be, it's a Halloween special. The Universal monsters are, I think, terrific. They are the first real cinematic universe. It's enough credit, but they are the first cinematic universe. Most of the movies have spawned at least 2 to 3 sequels with team up movies as well. It's
how many have you seen?
I've seen them all.
Oh, I've seen them all. Even like Son of Dracula.
Yeah.
Really?
Yes.
Is it good?
It's all right. It's all right. It's all right. My favorite is the Frankenstein trilogy. My favorite is the Frankenstein trilogy, which I didn't know was a trilogy until like 4 years ago or something like that. And I was like, oh shit, there's a third movie, and it's great, starring Basil Rathbone.
He's good, man.
It's a terrific movie. So I'm very excited. We're gonna have Matthew Booth, who joined me a couple weeks ago to discuss noir movies and books. He's going to join us to dive into the monster movies, and that's going to be a lot of fun.
I do like monster movies.
That's going to be this Saturday, the 29th. Like I said, little Halloween special.
Okay, you share it.
Like, have you sent it to me?
I did.
Where?
The same place I always share.
I don't know where that is. I literally don't have anything, so I don't know where you've sent it.
Fine, I'll send it to you again. I'm sorry, it's just not working on my freaking iPad.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't have anything, so I don't know where you sent it.
All right. Well, I'm sending it through Discord then.
Okay. Yes. Let me see.
Oh, it is unsuccessful. Wow, today's a very bad day for me to share things, isn't it?
It seems so. Okay, let me see if I can find this.
No, it didn't. It didn't export. It didn't export. It's very sad. I hate it when technical errors happen on live. But that's okay. I'm gonna share it myself.
I've got it here. You sent it to me.
Oh, you did. Okay. Well,
You
there
shared
you
it on.
go.
You shared it on Discord.
Okay, it works.
And there we go.
Yeah.
We have Bond.
I could only do so much in an hour and a half.
It's still pretty good. Still pretty good.
Thanks.
You get the gist. You get
Yeah.
the gist. You got your
Idris.
Idris. I don't know who the girl is, but I like.
Come on, guess who it is.
I have no clue, and I'm not gonna guess.
Jennifer Connelly.
Okay, cool. Hey, she was great in Top Gun.
She was.
Oh, I got a little bit of a crush on her. Dear God.
And then the villain, because like you told me, I asked you what would be a villain that would kind of work with
Peter Capaldi.
Yeah, Peter Capaldi.
Yeah,
I think you can press. Yeah, there's a zoom in button. You see the little magnifying glass up there?
Yes, I do. Peter.
There he is.
Peter Capaldi. But yeah, no, this is cool.
They're in Australia. We were like, where did they not be in Australia?
You got a Wolfman here.
Yeah, I don't know what I was doing. I was like, maybe he has like, maybe it's just some kind of like chip algorithm or something. He's turning into something, some kind of bio mechanoid body horror going on. There's a girl in a, it's Australia, so it's sunny out there. And then there's this Rolls Royce with 6 wheels.
And there's a kangaroo.
Yeah, we needed a kangaroo because we need to know it's Australia.
Dear God. So for everyone wanting their Idris Elba Bond, here it is. Here's your Idris Elba Bond movie. That will never happen.
Not Rolls Royce. Aston Martin. Sorry, not Rolls Royce. My bad.
Biffer, I totally agree. I just let it
guy.
roll. I didn't correct him ages ago when he was saying Rolls Royce. But yes,
I'm not a car guy.
The Aston Martin DB5 is
it doesn't always have to be a DB5.
Yes, it does.
I wrote Aston Martin science fiction car on Google Images for reference. That's me.
Why science fiction?
So because I wanted like some modern looking car.
Fair enough. Yeah, no, it's funny. I feel like that there was a recent.
Also, thank you, Biffer.
Yes, there was a recent reveal of a truck by Elon Musk, and I looked at it. It does, but it looks to me. I looked at it and I was like, this looks like 1950s futuristic sci-fi nonsense, like stuff that I really do not like.
I know I don't like it, and my co-host Tim on the Twofold podcast, which will show up eventually, he's also my cousin. He loves that thing. He's like, I love it because I'm so sick of the same type of car. I want to see something that's different. I mean, to be fair. Yeah, he has a point, but still, it looks like an N64 render.
It looks dumb. But yeah, so anyway, we're going to wrap it up. Had a lot of fun tonight. Thank you for listening, Biffer, Lena, and whoever else is in the chat. I can see there's a few other people watching. Thank you for hanging out with us. Like I said, we'll be back this Saturday for a Halloween special, Monster Movie Bash.
Yeah, the Monster Mash.
And
blah, blah.
We will see you then. And then and then we're obviously back next Wednesday as well. We have author Derek B. Miller joining us to discuss the death of heroes and stories. That's going to be a fun one, but I'll tell you more about that on Saturday. Okay.
On Saturday.
Hasta luego. As Sean Connery's Bond used to say, ciao.
Get out of my